Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to those who joined us in our first webinar back on March 19th with these amazing CPOs, and welcome to those who are joining this discussion for the first time today. Like Mike said, we're also streaming live from Forge today on the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page, so we are saying hi to all of you as well. Today, we're doing a 30-day check-in on the impacts of COVID-19 with 3 of the top CPOs who in the last webinar shared with us strategies of how they are mitigating risks, how they were planning for supply shock, and how they were supporting their teams remotely. They also shared some stories of the front lines of how they housed officials and were head down in helping to find and supply PPE to those in need. If you want to go back and check that out, you can find that on the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn feed from March 19th or in the content library with Procurement Foundry. So joining me today are Rendy Miller, VP Strategic Sourcing and Procurement at Zendesk, Greg Tennyson, Head of Global Corporate Services for VSP Global, Sopan Shah, Chief Procurement Officer at Intercontinental Hotels Group. Hi guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, Sarah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to run through some of the questions we have prepared for the conversation today, and then we will look at addressing some of the audience questions at the end. And you can send those questions to us in the Q&A tab below inside the webinar or in the comments on social. I'll be monitoring that as well. So let's get started. We don't have a lot of time and we've got a lot to get to because I'm sure things have definitely changed for all of you in the last 30 days. So Sopan, I'm going to start with you. What is the view from the CPO level now as compared to what we were talking about 30 days ago?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for everybody for joining. I think this has been a fantastic conference so far, and big props to the Procurement Foundry team for executing this so well. So when we first talked 30 days ago, we were very much in what I call the preservation or the lockdown stage, right? That's when governments and societies were locking down. So it was a focus about capital and cash containment, and it was focused on PPE is king, right? For our colleagues, our customers, and guests. We're now starting to go into what I would call the recovery and the gradual reopening phase. And as we start thinking about that, it's about how is business going to happen differently in our industry? How are hotels going to service guests in a different way, have sanitization differently, cleaning, hygiene, so on and so forth. So now the focus is shifting towards the future. And as governments start to open up different operations and societies at a local or a regional level around the world, that's exactly where our strategy is now focused on. It's very much local and pan-market approaches because they have to be different in different parts of the world. So it's good news that things are getting a little back to normal. They're nowhere near where they were back January of this year, but we're starting to see some green shoots, especially in China.
That's some definitely inspiring news anyways. And now, Greg, I want to throw it over to you. What are you seeing on the CPO level? And then we've already got a question from the audience, so I want to take it there as well.
Sure. So, Ken, thank you for speaking to the future. It is interesting. We're continue to be hyper-focused on ensuring the welfare and safety of our employees, our doctors, our members, but as we transition, as you've called out, to reopening, our campuses, we're hyper-focused on creating protocols around social distancing, cleaning, what PPE, personal protective equipment, will be provided to our campus employees. We've been, for the last, it's been 7 weeks, 8 weeks, we've been really focused on providing PPE to our doctors, to reopen our stores, to our labs, to produce lenses, glasses, we have practices that we've acquired, we call it VSP Ventures, providing PPE to those doctors so they can reopen their offices. So it's interesting, it has been a transition now to reopening our offices, but in order to do that, what's required to ensure success so we don't have a resurgence of COVID as we enter fall. So we're really hyper-focused on making sure that we are providing for the safety and welfare of our employees, our doctors, our members. And it is interesting as we now look at state, local, county mandates, requirements, it's being flexible to address those concerns because we have offices all throughout the U.S. and internationally. So it's not only being focused on headquarters, it's also focusing on those other locations to meet their needs.
Yeah, and that was definitely something that we spoke about last time. So it doesn't sound like too much has changed, obviously, from a focus standpoint and the health and well-being, obviously, of everybody in the organization, which definitely does make sense. So from the audience, I know I said I would take questions later, but this one kind of goes with this first question. So Papel says, as CPOs, how have you all prepared for going back to work? And I think this is a really timely question because, we're talking about what the view looks like now. And I think we're all really preparing for that, now and moving forward. So Sopan, do you want to take that one? And then maybe Rendy, you can jump in on that one as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think, look, when we say going back to work, I honestly have to say, I don't think we've stopped working harder than even before this crisis came, right?
Good point.
In fact, working from home, I think for most of our teams around the world has actually shown us not only is it doable, but two, it's shown some very amazing amounts of resilience in people, and productivity, I believe, at least in our team, has gone up. So I think first and foremost, this has taught us a great lesson on, working virtually to do what we do in our procurement profession. That's point one. And then point two is when we think about going back to the office, we have all sorts, types of offices and corporate offices that we have. In Atlanta, in Georgia, we have about 2,000 people in our office building. So we have to think about everything from how do you get 2,000 people across 22 floors in a high rise up an elevator when you're supposed to do social distancing of 6 feet, right? It'd probably take 3 hours just to get people to their floors. So when you think about those types of logistical challenges, we're still, in my opinion, a couple months at best away from actually going back into the office, because we have to solve for all of those types of solutions. And you can do it with different schedules and shifts and with all the PPE and masks, hand sanitizers, all those things, even plexiglass cube separators. I mean, whatever you need to do. Right. I think we are seeing that we're doing great work already, so that we don't want to rush it and in turn, create potentially a situation that's not good for our employees and our colleagues.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that across all of the supply chains. I was talking to somebody else the other day on the warehousing side. How do we minimize the contact between warehouse staff, distribution staff, and drivers? And so I think these conversations are happening all over the place, just in different scenarios, depending on the organizations. What about you, Rendy? How are you preparing to go back to work?
Sure. I think it's interesting. Nobody is rushing to be the first one back in the office, I don't think, or the company that's leading the way in terms of we're going to be the first ones and we're going to show everybody how it's done. We are taking a very conservative approach, very similar to SOPAN and the IHG organization, but we're looking at, things that we never dreamed that we would procure, such as PPE and, these different workstations. How do we modify that? And then we're also looking at, we have proven that this remote work environment can work very, very effectively. And so our anticipation is that we will never be, back in the office the way we were. We're not going back to the way we were. This was not a timeout, and then we just immediately moved back into the way it was when we left in the middle of March. So we're looking at some varied options in terms of modifying our workspaces, even our strategies around real estate and what we're looking at in terms of our global footprint. We're very much concerned about you know, that's going to look differently than the strategies that we had in place, you know, just a couple months ago. So reworking a lot of those different things, and then still continuing to be very hyper focused on our employee well-being. We, you know, we survey about we've got another one coming up about every 8 weeks or so on, you know, how are our employees feeling about this new work environment, and adjusting to that and really responding to the feedback that we're getting from those surveys. So it's a moving target, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's constantly
great
changing.
Points. I mean, we're looking at reshuffling from, I think, all sorts of different vantage points, right? Not only, you know, your footprint from a real estate standpoint, but then maybe your carbon footprint. We can take a look at that a little bit more closely as we all look to what that new normal looks like, to reshuffling talent and really making sure that the people that we have in their roles are really in the right roles, and what does that look like, and how can we go back to work and make the most of it? So I think those are really great points. So now let's talk about the impacts. So in our last discussion, we talked about the top 3 impacts, and that was 45 days ago. Sopan said cash is king, liquidity, health and safety of employees, which we talked about today, communication. Greg said cybersecurity, realigning priorities, and Rendy said values are really being tested and everybody's stepping up. Are these still the top impacts of what you're seeing, you know, from COVID-19, or has this changed for you? Greg, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
I think what's being highlighted in today's environment with economic uncertainty, and it's interesting. I read a Wall Street article yesterday that talked about public transportation and companies now looking at, in highly dense populations, moving offices out to, you know, more of a suburban setting. So it's interesting how this is playing out, right? So your transportation strategy, your office strategy, the density of your office, we're looking at maybe 1/3 of our employees returning to work because of social distancing. You know, Sopan touched on an elevator. I can envision a quota on an elevator where you have 2 people that can now ride an elevator going forward because of the 6-foot rule. So it's really impacting how we move forward and the timing for moving forward. Everyone's concerned about the resurgence or retriggering of another COVID event with the flu season coming in the fall. So how we repopulate our campuses, how we get people into work, you know, transportation strategies. Do we provide mass transportation? But mass transportation could be, you know, a 60-person bus with 10 people aboard, 20 people aboard because of the distancing, social distancing protocols. So I think we fundamentally have to rethink what Rennie's talking about, the new norms, what that looks like for our workplace. And it's fundamentally going to change how we work. So I would envision hiring practices. We're no longer concerned about hiring people that sit within our backyard. They can work anywhere in the world because they'll be working from home.
Absolutely.
So it's going to change every facet of how we work going forward. It's going to be interesting.
It's so true. And you know, I mean, I know that cybersecurity, like you mentioned the last time, is going to be a top impact, but you're right. Adding workplaces, workforces, reshuffling of talent, taking a look at who you're hiring and where, it's probably opened the eyes for a lot of organizations as to where those people could be located and how to look for them. Rendy, do you want to jump in here? I know you were talking about, you know, the impacts being, values being tested. What are the top impacts now that you are really focusing on?
It's so interesting because 30 days ago when we were having this conversation, I don't think any of us had the foresight to think, you know, how long is this really going to last, and what are these lasting, you know, how how large are the changes going to be that we are going to have to make, not just, modifying, in the short term, but really in the long term. And I think, some of the things that we are very focused on now, as opposed to even just 30 days ago, are more looking at, what is necessary and what are nice to haves. So that's been really a big thing that across the organization we're looking at. We're working really much more closely even now than we were before with our business partners in reevaluating, also with our finance partners, evaluating how we're spending our money, how we're spending our time, how long are projects taking. This is one thing that as a company, we're looking at more shorter term projects that bring immediate value, as opposed to these long drawn out projects that we don't know what things are going to be like in 6 to 12 months when that project might be done, because it might be completely different. So what things are going to have an immediate impact now? The other thing that we're doing just as a company, more so than just as my procurement organization, is we're really going back to our roots of, we've always been hyper-focused on our customers, but really looking at those small businesses. Zendesk is we're a customer service software company. And now more than ever, our small customers need us, and they need that ability to be able to communicate really, really well with their customers. And so we're kind of going back to our roots, which is kind of refreshing. I wasn't at Zendesk, back in the very beginning, but it is fun to go back and just see how we're helping those small businesses stay afloat, be able to communicate with their customers, and really sustain them through this time.
Yeah, it's bringing the community together and rallying around those small businesses is what I've really seen through COVID-19, and it is good to see. So Pan, last but not least, what are the top impacts you're seeing right now as opposed to 30 days ago?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. And I think the biggest thing I would say is I've been spending a lot of time myself and with my leadership team thinking about what the future will hold. And as Randy just said, we don't know what the future is. If anybody knew what we know now from 30 days ago, we'd be a millionaire. I'd be selling PPE to everybody. But the truth is, as you think about the future and the business we're in 100 countries. And the heart of our business is hotels. And I think one of the things that has really struck me is we have to think about de-risking the supply chain by being closer and being more dispersed. I like to call it a federated model than we are today, right? Yeah. We operated in a world where we would have, big corporate offices with lots of people in the eyes of collaborating together, being able to do agile teams together, war rooms together. But I think working remotely has shown us that if we do it well, we can actually have some of our best talent and some of our people closest to our customer, internally or externally, to better provide solutions that are maybe local or pan-regional that our hotels or our corporate staff may need. And I think you have to think about that vision. You have to know where you want to go in the next 18 to 24 months, but you also then have to do the hard work between now and the next short term of the next few months of really buttressing that strategy with, we have to have much better data, more automation, stronger use of AI, self-service tools, and at the end of the day, just quicker decision speed, right? One thing this has taught us is we can all make decisions a lot faster than in the past where we needed consensus and processes and things like that. Enable, empower the teams to make decisions, be closer to the business, and use data as a unifier on a global basis. And I think procurement could look very, very different 2 to 3 years from now.
Yeah, you brought up some really great points. I mean, we're seeing collaboration across industries of, partnerships that we would never have seen pre-COVID, which is really, really great to see. And so I think that's a huge point. And then you talk about procurement and what that looks like coming out of COVID. What are the procurement risks that we're facing now and moving forward as we come out of COVID? What does that look like, and where do you see that going, Sopan?
I think some of the biggest risks are, not relying on category strategy being too focused on scale and cost. I think what this has taught us is having flexibility, having almost a wider source of supply on a global basis is allowing companies to be more nimble. So in fact, I think some of the more decentralized procurement functions could actually solve some of these things much better than things that are highly centralized and rigid. So I think that's one of the things that's coming out of this. And then the second is what I alluded to in kind of the previous question is just decision speed. I think there is not enough focus in most companies, especially around the role procurement plays with the board, with the executive committees, to speed up decision making and enable procurement to kind of do things without running through 50 different business cases to get a yes. Because sometimes we need to move fast, and by empowering the teams to do what they need to do, I think is going to be another big shift in the role of procurement moving forward.
So true. You make a really great point. We need to empower those that we've put into positions to be able to make decisions and stop making it so hard for that to happen. And you're right, COVID is definitely showcasing that. So Greg, I want to turn this one over to you because I'm seeing a lot of risks with inventory. And I think that you'll be the right person to talk about this because not necessarily that you're in retail, but with retail, we're seeing a lot of excess inventory, right? There's a lot of inventory that's sitting in containers, product that's been bought for Easter, spring, Mother's Day that are maybe not getting on, that are not getting onto shelves, that people aren't buying. And so we've sort of run this risk of too much inventory. So how do you mitigate that? Where are we going with this nowhere stock? Are we, changing from just in time to just in case? How do we mitigate these risks moving forward of all of this excess stock?
Sure. We actually do have over 700 retail stores.
Okay.
Sarah, just so you know. So we are in the retail space. It is interesting. There are challenges. I see repatriation or reshoring of the supply chain occurring. Looking at critical components and bringing them back to the U.S. just from a supply continuity perspective. Regarding inventory levels, it is interesting. You have Neiman Marcus, you have JCPenney's, you have these big box stores declaring bankruptcy because they haven't been nimble, agile to meet the demands of the economy, of the consumer. Right. So I see more of a transition to these retail outfits or retail stores being more display, leveraging technology. So when I was at Salesforce, we had a project working with one of the big retail chains that would look at your phone, your IP address for your phone, and as you walked into the store, it would queue up items that you may have purchased in the past or the next, fall season, spring season equivalent to it. So I think technology will be more prevalent in the retail space, and it will leverage, as Pam was talking, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and it will queue up opportunities. But the retail stores, as we've known it, where they have all this inventory on display, I think over time, they'll just become more technology, more screens, interactive screens that will display what the options are, and then you'll order it, and it will show up at your home. So less connectivity, tangible goods being touched, being displayed, and more kind of visual display of what the options are. I know when you walk into a retail store, iPractice, they have a frame board. They have all these frames that are displayed on the wall. That's going to transition because of the COVID examples that we've experienced with, droplets and contamination. So it'll be more visual. It won't be tangible, tactile interaction with goods. So again, fundamentally, it's going to change. I've read articles in the Wall Street about, retail moving away from displaying of goods to be more of, a coffee shop, interactive place, a bookstore, more interactive. So it's going to be interesting what the new norms look like given the environment that we're expected to operate in going forward. But I would agree with procurement having more autonomy and more access to the board because of the COVID PPE. You know, we've made commitments on behalf of the company that normally would have taken maybe weeks to process, where we're just doing it now on the phone because of the urgency of getting PPE on hand, on meeting the needs of the organization. So greater autonomy, quicker decisions, reliance on technology to drive interactions, intelligence. It's a new paradigm that we're going to be expected to operate in from a procurement standpoint. Exciting times.
It is exciting. And you know, there's a lot to consider right now, and I don't envy any of you because I think you've got your work cut out for you, right? There's a lot for you to do, not only in your role as leadership to the organization, but also as leaders to the employees that work for you. And so I'm sure there's, you know, you're being pulled in a few different directions when it comes to some of the decisions that you're making. So how do we plan for coming out of this? Do we have more information than we did when we met mid-March, or what does that look like? Rendy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think we have a little more information than when we started, but we don't have the amount of information that we're going to have 30 days from now. So I feel like we are getting information in these tiny, you know, kind of bits
Parcels
and pieces. Yes. And it's just, as we know, and as we, you know, can kind of forecast. And Sopan said, you know, if we had a crystal ball and could see what's going to be happening, you know, toward the end of this year, we would all be not sitting here, you know, talking about procurement. We would have something, you know, much more valuable to be, you know, offering. But it's just, we are having to make decisions quickly. I think, you know, this has been a resounding theme, that we have to act on what we know today while still kind of preparing for what we don't know in, say, 90 days out. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at right now, and saying this is what we know. This is how we're dealing with things right now, and, you know, kind of forecasting out at 90-day increments.
Yeah, and learning from what we're going through right now, I think, right? Learning every single day as things change and things pop up, and we get those parcels of information, learning from that and being able to pivot. Like you said, the decisions need to be made fast, and the only way that we can do that is to be agile and to pivot. So then what are the top 3 things procurement professionals should consider moving forward in working with suppliers? Are negotiations going to change? I would assume the resounding answer is going to be yes. So Sopan, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think negotiations are going to change depending on, you know, the different commodities, categories that we're sourcing. And I think it also is going to be about the risk. I think risk and a truly, you know, expanded risk regime of understanding what all the potentials are. Oftentimes, and we heard this earlier today in the Procurement Foundry session from this morning, you know, many people didn't really have pandemics as a risk that they had really figured out. So I think fundamentally working with suppliers and negotiating with them is going to be the people that we really need and empower us to do what we do. It's going to be much bigger, deeper relationships and partnerships. So it goes beyond just saying, hey, do you have a BCP plan? It's going to be, how are we going to actually do this? How do we actually simulate this? How do we do a wide risk analysis? And then I think also, you know, something Rendy said earlier, we have to really think about some of the smaller businesses and the medium-sized businesses and how we can actually enable them to grow and survive at a time like this. Because at the end of the day, our customer, the franchisees who run many of our hotels and own many of our hotels, they're small businesses. They are the heart of you know, employment in countries like the US. And how do we make sure that we are supporting them and their communities so that capital isn't just coming to big companies, but it's actually going to those smaller businesses that are spread out across different communities, not just in your local community. And that's going to change how we negotiate completely. It's going to be much more partnership based and much more value based rather than cost.
Well, and I think we're going to be looking at and creating new negotiations with new partners, right? I don't think globalization is gone. I think that certain products could potentially be nearshored in the future, like PPE potentially. I don't know. The French government has come out and said that. But I don't see globalization going away. I think that you're right. We're going to foster more relationship with different suppliers globally and diversify our manufacturing and supplier base. What do you think about that, Greg? What do you think about the negotiations and the diversification and the role of procurement in that?
Interesting. When we talk about diversification, I would add that we should be looking to our diverse suppliers, or maybe we be concerns, and helping them to ensure that they survive during these difficult economic times.
Good point. Yeah.
Because, you know, with diverse suppliers, they may actually be more agile and nimble than the larger corporations. And I do believe we've touched on it. It's interesting, 150 of our chemicals are produced in China, and those 150 chemicals are used in our pharmaceuticals. But yet they're in China. So I do see, call it onshoring, reshoring, repatriation. I do see supply chain being reevaluated and coming back onshore just out of necessity for business continuity reasons. I do believe our negotiations are going to change. I think there'll be more focus on supplier viability because there are suppliers that are in distress today. And we need to do business with those that need the right investments, but also who can survive. So we just today had a conversation to look at internally the suppliers that we rely on that are within our remit scope to ensure that they'll be here tomorrow. The travel industry, and I know SOPAN represents a hotel group, but you think about the uncertainty that they're dealing with, just having travelers come through the property. Their suppliers are in distress. We need to get in front of it, and we need to make sure that we're investing in the right relationships. And fundamentally, it's going to change how we negotiate because they will be more strategic, collaborative, and done in partnership. We're no longer adversarial. It's not about, you know, us winning, them losing. It has to be a partnership in order for them to survive during this very difficult time.
I'm glad that you said that. Hopefully the days of pointing fingers have gone, and this has kind of, you know, taught us something as we move out of this. So Randy, last time we spoke, you know, there was a few leadership decisions or procurement decisions that were maybe put on hold or accelerated because of COVID. Has that changed? Do you have some new priorities and some new decisions that have come to the forefront as we move through this?
Well, I alluded to this earlier. We are looking at everything that's been on the table and everything that's been in the planning phases in terms of projects and things like that, and what is critical and what is maybe just a nice to have. I would say the area that we have maybe pivoted the greatest is in looking at what is going to have the most near-term impact. And that is both for our customers and then for, you know, our internal organization as well. So looking at how do we reprioritize to say, what do we need now, as opposed to what is, you know, a very long-term, you know, type of initiative. Yeah. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest shifts that we've made, but also, and Greg has shared with me a book called Why Simple Wins, which is, I have loved for so much since you first shared that with me, but we've really gotten back to this place of simplification. How do we simplify our business? How do we make it easier for our customers to do business with us? In turn, how do we make it easier to do business with procurement, you know, internally? We just need to become much more agile in our thinking and in our processes and in just the way we do things, and really making things simple and easier to conduct business. So.
It's so true. Keep it simple, right? I won't say the last word, but the KISS principle. Well,
Yep.
and also finding collaborative opportunities and ways to work together internally, right? We're not only looking at collaboration from an outside perspective, I think we're seeing more collaboration internally between not only procurement and supply chain, but, you know, supply chain and marketing, customer experience. How do we make that experience, you know, much better for our customers, and, you know, how can we work better together?
Yeah.
So I've spoken to a lot of leaders recently, and they're faced with a lot of stress. Operationally, they're tasked with being a shoulder for their teams. They're also challenged with the personal impacts of COVID-19 as well. And I think sometimes we're remiss in seeing that, because they're the leaders, and you know, as a leader in your organization, how are you keeping your teams motivated? We talked about this 30 days ago. There was a few ways that we were keeping them motivated, but it had just started, right? Now we're 30 to 45 days in. How are you guys doing? How are you keeping it focused? How are you keeping your teams motivated? So Pan?
Yeah, I think, well, I would give two examples from my side. First is booze. No, I'm not kidding, but like just making sure that, you know, my leadership team, I've stocked them well with some good wine to get them through working from home. But that's one thing. Second thing I would say is, look, it's making sure we find balance. So when I say balance, every single conversation I have with any of my leaders, and in turn they are leaders of others, is to make sure that people are finding balance the best they can. If it means take a day off, just disconnect, go do whatever you have to do. And it could be anything from go play video games to watch Netflix all day to whatever you need to find some balance in your life. But also making sure that people are spending enough time focused on their own development at this time, because we do have more time. We don't have commutes, for example, right now. We may not have some projects that have been canceled. So this is an amazing time to focus on personal development. And I think, you know, what we're doing today in this exercise is a form of development. And I think doing more of this at this time is one of the ways that people can get motivated, because it's not going to make them just a better person on my team. It's going to make them a better person. And by focusing on that at this time, I think is going to get a lot out of, you know, people's satisfaction with the circumstances that they're in.
Are you finding that people are not taking the time off because we're at home more, and, you know, it almost feels like we're working on weekends as well? I don't know about your team. I mean, for me, I do anyways, but I'm also talking to a lot of other people that it's flowing into their weekends and they're finding it hard to take time off. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, I would just add quickly on that. There's absolutely blurring of reality going on, right? Because you know, you essentially walk into a guest room or your basement or your office, and you're at work, and you have to transition in and out of your personal life throughout the day. I think having rituals, for me, and I've shared this with a lot of people, is very important. I still pretend that I'm going to the office, but I'll work out, get ready for work, and go to my home office and work. By having a ritual, I think that helps a lot. And then at the end of the day, telling people you can focus, you can work a lot, but try to have a ratio that you're spending at least 20% of your time thinking about the future, right? And I think that's important too, because if we are constantly stuck in this blurring of schedules, dealing with the here and the now and the current crisis of the day, and not thinking about the future strategy, I think that also can be hugely demotivating and draining. So that's another little tip that I'd like to give people.
Yeah, and it's super important because we're talking about organizations looking at talent, maybe reshuffling talent, things like that. But we also need to look at it from the other side, you know, and take a look at the organization that you're working with and making sure that the alignment is there. And making sure that you're happy and that you're feeling satisfied and potentially not overworked or demanding on, you know, working on weekends and different things like that. So it works both ways. And I think we're really given that opportunity right now to take a look at it from all lenses. Greg, did you want to throw anything in on that as far as, you know, personal impacts or how you're keeping your teams motivated?
You know, Sopan makes a great point when it comes to rituals and schedules, because we do blur what is the office versus what is the home. Even though we're sheltering in place, I think it becomes difficult to establish I'm at work versus I'm at home. So great point. I know our leadership team, down from our CEO into the organization, is just trying to keep a calm persona, you know, remain calm, always be, you know, visible, engaged. And when I say visible, virtually with the team, be transparent in how we communicate, share information that we can, when we can, and stay engaged. So we have a standing 7:30 phone call for an hour, and we'll get on, just say good morning, talk about our day, you know, what, you know, top of mind, you know, challenges, opportunities, and it's with the leadership team. So I really have tried to leverage tools. We use Microsoft Teams, so we have regular conversation. I am finding that I'm more online, if you will, than ever before. I have less personal time to get work done. So I've even gone to the point where I carve out time on my calendar where I'll just block an hour or two in order to be productive outside of meetings. So, you know, again, to what Sopan's point is, make sure that you have a schedule, follow it, a ritual, and act as if you're going into the office. Carve out time so you can be productive. But, you know, as the leadership team, be calm, visible, transparent, and stay engaged, I think is fundamentally what it's about. Also, yeah, I've learned an invaluable lesson. There's three sides to a story: your side, my side, and then the truth. So just appreciate that people are stressed. They have things going on in their work life. They may be, you know, working with children at home, the virtual training, teaching that's going on in the home. So just be cognizant of what their full story is rather than rushing to conclusion. So just pause and reflect before rushing.
Great point. And really carve out that time. I've been doing 8-hour days on Zoom calls, and it doesn't help with getting, you know, being productive with everything else that you have to do. So I like that. So we are almost at the end. We've got some amazing engagement happening online, amazing comments over here. I want to ask you guys one last thing. What is the one thing the audience can take away from this conversation? Rendy, I'm going to start with you.
The one thing I would say, focus on what you can do today and on what we know today. And as much as we can prepare for what we think we might know about the future, be thinking about that, and just continue to have this mindset of agility and simplicity, because no doubt we are going to need to pivot. Regardless of what we're thinking is the way things are going to go right now, we are most likely going to have to pivot even in that, as prepared and as smart as we all think we are. And there are way smarter people than me, but we're going to need to make changes as we go. So just remain agile and flexible, and get ready for more change.
Love it. Greg, real quick, one thing people can take away.
So playing off Rendy's comment around pivoting, being agile, just, you know, make sure you're not responding to fake news. So validate information. Don't just trust it on the surface. So really understand the intelligence in which you're creating these decisions, and avoid the problem with fake news, misrepresentation of information.
And Sopan, real quick, last one thing.
Have hope. It will get better, and we'll get through it all.